By using the trade indicators criteria, we're able to see much more information and much more information that we can work with. Before looking at any of the data and figures, looking at the top of the screen, we see that Canada's imports represents 3% of world's imports for coffee. It is also ranked as number 9 out of the world imports of coffee. We also see the average distance between the supplying countries and the market concentration. The market concentration is based on the Herfindahl score or index, and it's used to measure the competitiveness and an indicator of signal of monopoly in that particular country or market. The values between 0 and 18 would signal a more competitive market where no significant amount of share of that product is held by any companies within that market again. And figures higher than 0.18 indicates a less competitive market for that product in that country. Few players in that country holds significantly more market than any other players. This is an indicator that could show potential legal or non-competitive or bureaucratic issues in that country for that particular product. So for instance, looking at Mexico, we see that the concentration is quite high, meaning that few players or few businesses own majority of the exports from Mexico to Canada for this particular product. So this would show that some potential issues, and there's very little choice of choosing an exporter because majority of the exports businesses are owned by few companies in Mexico. So a lot less competition than say for a country like Brazil, where there's significantly more competition, more players, and no one player owns majority of the exports of coffee from Brazil to Canada. The countries are listed in descending order of the value of imports to Canada. Colombia again is the top exporter of unroasted and non-decaffeinated coffee to Canada. We see that Colombia represents 30% of the total import value of coffee to Canada, followed by Brazil and Peru. So Brazil has 23.5% of coffee exports to Canada. We also see the quantity imported and the unit value. Looking at the growth in value and looking at the growth in quantity columns, for instance, we see that the value has been increasing between 2020 and 2024. So Canadians are paying more for coffee from Colombia by 8% from 2020 to 2024. However, we are not increasing our imports from Colombia. It's 0%. So we are paying more for coffee, yet we're importing less of it. Again, this can be explained by higher costs of coffee, which we can see on a daily basis when we shop for coffee. Brazil, for instance, we see that we are paying more for coffee by 21% between 2020 and 2024. Looking at Indonesia, we see that we're paying 9% more for coffee between 2020 and 2024. However, we've actually reduced the quantity of imports of coffee from Indonesia. So again, we're importing less coffee, however we're paying more by 9% between, again, that period. Looking at other indicators, we see the ranking of these nations in terms of their coffee exports to the rest of the world. We see that Colombia is the third largest coffee exporter to the world. Brazil is the first or number one exporter of coffee to the world. Interestingly, Vietnam is the second highest exporter of coffee to the world. Vietnam has been under the radar and it's relatively new exporting nation of coffee to the world. So it's the second exporter of coffee. We see the percentage of share of world's coffee exports. So Brazil represents more than 1/3 of the coffee exports to the world. Colombia represents 10%, and Vietnam represents almost 12% of coffee exports in the world. We also see the growth in coffee exports cumulatively out of the world's perspective. Coffee exports is growing by 16% in between this time period. So there's various indicators that we can look at and obtain value from for evaluating exports